Thanks for staying with us. Electoral reform in the country has taken centre stage this past week. The Ministerial Advisory Committee on the electoral system hosted its first consultative meeting with stakeholders and immediately put the spotlight on how independent candidates can stand for provincial and national elections. It follows a Constitutional Court ruling last year that preventing this is unconstitutional. A member of that committee is Dr. Sithembile Mbete, and she joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know you're very passionate about the subject matter of this advisory committee, and that's why I wasn't surprised to see that you're a member of it, Dr. Mbete. Remind us just very quickly, for those who perhaps haven't kept track of the story, what did the Constitutional Court, what was the decision that they handed down that led to the formation of the work that now needs to be done by this committee that you are a part of?
Hi there, thanks for having me. So what the Constitutional Court said was that the Electoral Act is unconstitutional insofar as it does not allow for individual citizens to contest in national and provincial elections in their individual capacity. Currently, the Electoral Act is written in such a way that you have only political parties can contest in an election at national level and at provincial level. You can't register to contest as an individual. And so basically what the Constitutional Court said is that it gave Parliament 2 years to amend the Electoral Act to make it possible for individual candidates to contest the elections.
Now, the discussions that you've had, obviously it's a start of a very, very long process. But going by the information that came out of that meeting, because you sent out some tweets while the meeting was underway, the support that's needed for independent candidates was something that came up. It's all well and good to say independent candidates can now stand, but if they don't have the support, whether in infrastructure or financial, it means that ruling isn't worth the paper it's written on. What could you glean from the initial conversations about how we can go about making sure that these independent candidates do indeed have the support that they need to make a proper run for it if they do decide to stand?
Certainly, and so remember that at local government level, independent candidates can contest in ward elections, and from that experience, what we got from the different stakeholders was that there's a lot of barriers to entry, but also barriers in the process of the actual election for independent candidates. Financial barriers certainly came up, that people cannot, it's expensive to contest an election, and so having the adequate finances. But then also we heard stories of intimidation, so where the bigger parties will intimidate the individuals who are contesting in a particular ward. And finally, access to media and to publicity and to other infrastructure is also a challenge. So that was raised as something that we will need to think about as we are drafting our proposals for the Minister and for Parliament.
Access for the youth was also something that came up in discussion in this committee. How important is that going to be, and how could the electoral system possibly open itself up to being more accessible for young people when it comes to voting days?
So one of the things that was very interesting was the generational divide amongst the people who were presenting. The older generation was generally more supportive and quite happy with the electoral system as it currently stands. Those representing youth organizations were the ones who were calling for change and to make it easier for young people to participate in the elections. And there was a view that changing the system so that individuals can contest for elections will make it easier for young people, because then they don't need to navigate party politics and party structures, which are generally very hierarchical. But of course, what was raised then was needing to have the resources, but also just the know-how. In our education system, we don't kind of have civics 101 for people to learn how the political system actually works. How do you register to be a candidate? How much does it cost? All of those intricacies of the system that is institutional knowledge that's generally held in political parties but isn't spread out into the broader public. So really doing a lot of information sharing and teaching people about how the system works came out as one of the very important things for increasing youth participation.
So there's still quite a bit of work left to do by your committee, and obviously the stakeholders, and it needs to be open to public discussion and that kind of thing. So we'll continue to keep track of that with you over the coming months and so on. But before I let you go, Sithembile, if you don't mind me throwing you a curveball, a very other important piece of news coming through this week, the Political Party Funding Act of 2018 coming into effect this week. And I know it's a bit of a curveball because this isn't really part of what we initially were meant to discuss with you today. But I also know this would have been something that's close to your heart as well. It was an organisation, IDASO, some 16 years ago that brought this first to the courts down in the Western Cape. IDASO, I think you spent some time there in your younger years as well. How important is it for that act to come into effect as we have seen this week?
It's hugely important. All of the things that we've been hearing about in the Zondo Commission around state capture and corruption, so much of it is tied to who funds our political parties, who funds our politicians. Democracy is expensive, and we understand that people will need funding, but we want to know transparency is very important for accountability. And I think that the biggest contribution that this legislation makes is just making it a requirement for political parties to disclose who their donors are. It also makes it a requirement for donors to disclose who they are giving money to. And also it provides for two funds to fund political parties from the public purse, which I think will be very important for allowing for greater competition in the system as well.
Thank you so much for that. Dr. Sithembile Mbete, she's with the University of Pretoria's Department of Political Sciences. Always great to have her on. I always feel brighter intellectually after speaking to her.